Hey everyone, everyone could take their seats, that would be great, thank you. Okay, and welcome to Mayor's Question Time. I'm your host, Chantal Herbert. It's wonderful to be here at the Riverside Community Health Project in the Carnegie, I think I'm saying it right, Carnegie, am I saying that right? Carnegie building and online via Zoom. Last year, the North of the Tyne Combined Authority provided funding to this very project, which has meant that it can deliver many more activities to local people and families. These range from English language classes to healthy eating and early years sessions to employment support and accredited training. There has been a wealth of success stories from the project, and we are delighted with the continued support to the community. And before we get to the questions, we have a few practical things first. We have a photographer tonight, and if you don't want your picture taken, please let them know, and they're over there. We have BSL interpreter present, and we will be in view in the who will be in view on the camera to enable people at home to participate. And in the event of a fire, please use the emergency exits to your left, and well, that's my left, your right, and to the left and right. and you will congregate at the back of the building on the grassy knoll. We've had a lot of questions tonight, and which I'll be reading out. Unless someone's in the audience to ask the question, and you are welcome to use the microphone to ask those questions. And if you want to do that, please raise your hand. And a lot of the questions were already submitted, so we're hoping that at least a couple of you are in the room to answer those. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Mayor, Jamie Driscoll.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing? Nice.
All right.
Very formal.
I was thinking I should have come in on a zip line, shouldn't I?
Should have been a red carpet.
A bit of style, yeah.
To match your red book. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Okay, there's a load going on at the moment, Chantal. Yeah, and a lot of that's reflected in tonight's questions.
There's been a lot of questions, actually. I was quite surprised. I had a lot of questions last time, and I was kind of thinking, maybe we'll have a dip this time. Yeah,
it's always tricky because you want to answer every question, but a lot of them are close enough together and you sort of just weld them into one or two questions, even if it might have been 50 or 60 people asking similar things.
Well, we're going to get through a lot tonight. But first of all, I just want to ask how you got here tonight. Mode of transport.
Oh, mode of transport. I got a lift, actually, because I don't own a car anymore.
Not at all?
Not at all, no.
None in the family at all?
My wife has a car. She's a GP, so she needs it for visits. But she cycles when she's not doing visits. So she's really diligent.
Wow, cycling family?
Yes. My poor sons, if we're going out somewhere, we make them get on the bike and cycle through the rain. I cycled to work this morning.
Have you got a tandem?
Or a goodies bike for everyone. Yeah, no.
Baker's bike?
I do have an electric bike.
Oh, great.
And it's quite good because if I'm turning up to a meeting somewhere, it's often the case that, you know, if I'm going smart as the mayor and wear a suit, I can't just use a push button dripping a sweat. It's not what people want.
No.
And people are usually quite polite if you're the mayor. But, you know, I don't attest that with me whiffing a bit. But on the electric bike, it's great because if you turn the power right up, you can go up the hills. And you turn up somewhere and they say, but you're how's that happening? So, yeah.
I'm amazed that you don't have a car at all, though.
And it presents challenges, but it's one of these things about lived experience. If you're going to try and fix something, it helps if you understand it. So I think there are far too many politicians who are cosseted. They don't have to actually engage with the public. They have, you know, ministers have ministerial chauffeurs. They have somebody organising everything for them. I understand there's the argument for you don't want, you know, them spending all this time looking at bus timetables.
Why not, though?
But you have to actually use public transport if you want to know how to fix it.
Yeah, how did everyone get here tonight? Because I drove, and I'll admit I drove. Anyone come by bus? One person, that's it. Wow, so we all drove. Anyone walk here? Wow.
Well, I think, isn't that interesting? Because I think part of the question is, what about the people who aren't here?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the people who aren't here are the ones who've suffered from poor public transport, who didn't have access to a car, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, on Zoom as well, people watching on Zoom, why are they not here?
Yeah, and how did you get into your living room or spare bedroom?
See, while we're on the subject of sort of transport and buses, you know, I know you've had a lot of questions in the past and probably submitted for this week about transport. What are the sort of common questions that you get around transport, you know, about fixing and what do you say to people about those common questions?
Well, I sit on the Transport for the North Board, which covers the whole of the north of England, along with other mayors and some local authority leaders. And one of the things that comes up there all the time is the trains don't work. When they do work, and there's nothing to do with industrial disputes, they don't work when there isn't a strike either. They're frequently cancelled, or expensive, or unreliable. And who would just walk to the train station and get on a train and think, I can buy a ticket on the train? You wouldn't, would you? You know you're going to get totally fleeced in that circumstance. But then the buses, so it's not quite, you don't have to pre-book your tickets, but it's still the case that someone was telling me they live in Newburn, just a couple of miles that way, and went for a night out, and then the bus back wasn't there.
Just didn't turn up.
So they now no longer have confidence in the buses and stop using the buses. There's people stop using the trains. There are a lot of people buying old clapped out cars because they don't have the confidence in public transport anymore. So there's a whole range of problems. But I was talking to someone earlier today about young people in Blythe. And
Where we were last time.
Which is, well, yeah, actually, it's the last Mayor's Question Time venue, wasn't it? And they were saying that if you're offered a job in the Team Valley as a young person, you cannot reliably get there and back on public transport. So if you don't have a car, or you don't have a driving license, or any number of reasons, you might not be old enough, you might not afford it, you've lost that opportunity to get that job, or to go to that course, or other life-limiting events. So the question is, I guess, how do you fix it?
Well, yeah, can you fix it?
Can you fix it? Yeah, well, what we should do is we should all just take a leaf out of the Prime Minister's book and just go around on a private jet, I think.
I've got 3, so
yeah.
I'm ready.
He's given up even pretending he cares about the climate emergency, hasn't he?
And I know the new devolution deal comes with transport powers and funding. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So the North of Tyne, as it stands, we're in now, which covers all of Newcastle, all of North Tyneside, all the way up to Berwick, all the way over to Haltwhistle. We don't have transport powers devolved because the Tyne and Wear metro system is 36 stations in the north of Tyne, but 24 in the south of Tyne. And there was going to be an issue about who would be in charge of it. If I was in charge of it all, elected mayor, but the people of Gateshead didn't get to vote for me, is that really fair? No, it's not. So government used that as a reason to say you can't have it. So when I was elected, it was in my manifesto in 2019 that I would try and bring the region together so we could get transport devolved, so that we can do something called bus franchising, which sounds a bit like someone should be selling ice creams on it, but no, well, I suppose that could be an option. What it is at the moment, bus companies are entirely private. Now, a local authority can pay them to run a bus, but they can't control the bus. They can't decide what the timetables must be, what the specifications should be, issues with joint ticketing. So particularly places in Northumberland, where you might have one bus company racing the other one to the bus stop, and then there's a big gap and none of them are stuck to the timetable. Or you get a return ticket, but you're thinking, I can't use it on the other bus, shall I come back? So I'll just get 2 singles, and the whole thing's expensive. And the only way to fix that is to get the power to bring them back into public control. But that gets us some really interesting opportunities. Then we can link it in with the metro system, with the heavy rail system, so the Tyne Valley line that goes to Hexham and over to Carlisle. The new Northumberland line that we're opening, there's only 2 rail lines opening in this country, one of them's here. And a lot of people have been involved in this, a lot of people deserve to share the credit, but I spent a lot of time talking to ministers to make sure that they weren't cutting that down from 8 stations to 5.
It's a massive drop.
And it is, because if you don't have a network, it doesn't work. And that's the problem with our current public transport system. It runs mostly from point of high density use to another point of high density use so they can make a profit. But anyone who wants to then go a little bit further has no option. So they get a car and they don't even use that middle bit. So the idea is, and this is why we're saying that it's interesting, the people who aren't here tonight, is if you get a transport system that's so good that you can get to your work or your college, you can get your goods delivered anyway, you can go on a night out and you don't need a car for any of that stuff, you could save a fortune. Because on private cars, we spend, on average, £1,500 for every man, woman and child in the North East on private cars. We spend £3 billion a year on it. So the question is, where does the money come from? Well, you get more people onto it. And 91% of 11-year-olds have one of these, a smartphone. Not everybody does, and there are other ways, but you can get an app on there and the smart technology. So you walk onto the bus, you don't have to buy the ticket, it knows you're on the bus. And so the bus is faster because the bus driver's not stopping selling tickets, the bus driver's driving. And we can then put in what are called bus gates, so that the bus has a transponder on it, and as it approaches the traffic lights, it turns the traffic lights red for the cars, and The bus goes in a lane round the side and then turns green for the cars. And it's faster for the cars because you have 70 people on the bus rather than 70 people in cars, so it's faster for everybody. We can then start to, that young person in Blythe, that job in Team Valley, we can start to say things like, right, there you go, for work, boomph, you can get there, kiddo, if you're an apprentice. We can start to work with employers and bring in concessionary season tickets. So for public sector workers, or care workers, or teachers, or help with recruitment. Now, that's going to be a great recruitment bonus for the North East, because what you can do, once you've got the full thing on an entire smart system, you can say to someone, once you've hit a certain amount of use, the rest of the year is free unlimited travel. And as you're getting more people onto it, more money's coming in. Better transport, safer transport, because a lot of guards on the trains, I'm very keen on that, because people have to feel safe. The white ribbon, not just women and violence against women and girls, but older people as well often feel quite intimidated on public transport, especially late at night with antisocial behaviour.
Marginalised people feel it as well.
Absolutely.
I actually don't get on public transport a lot. I've had some bad experiences of racism on buses, and I pretty much refuse to get on public transport unless I absolutely have to. Not because I don't like public transport, I'm actually fearful, and I'm a youngish woman.
Well, that's interesting, because I was knocking on the door, as I often do as a Labour Party campaigner, and was chatting about public transport to a guy who was around about my age, Bangladeshi, and he was saying that he would always drop his daughters off and pick them up. He wouldn't let them use the bus because of racial abuse. And it doesn't happen every time, it just happens to be once, that's enough.
Oh, more than enough.
Absolutely.
I've had some last year, just at a bus stop waiting with my son. Really awful. Someone shouted at me and my son, and it was just like, I hadn't been on the bus for about a year, and I just, right, I'm not doing that. And my son gets on the bus a lot, and I'm very fearful, and trains, and I'm like, oh God.
And this is where we need a zero tolerance to racism on all forms of public transport. And that includes, by the way, not expecting someone who's paid a bus driver's wage to be coming out and acting as a nightclub bouncer. And it needs integrating properly with the ability to capture this stuff, to pursue it, and the willingness to pursue people in the courts when they are engaging in hate crimes. Let's call them for what they are. So that has to be part of it. But when you get this network where you've got more people using it, it becomes self-funding. And I'm in discussions with a number of routes to get extra money in, but we've already, through the devolution deal, there's hundreds of millions of pounds coming in, and that gets renewed every few years. So it's £1 billion in the first 3 years, this new devolution deal. That's a lot of money. And that gets us on that route to building this system up. So that involves franchising the buses. That's a legal process. I'll have to, dot the T's and cross the I's, or the other way around, and make sure that, we evaluate the evidence properly. But this gets us to having not just the greenest transport system, one that's affordable, gets you where you want to go, day or night. And in rural areas, you have on-demand transport. It's not going to be viable to run a double-decker bus through every little village and every hamlet. You don't have to. I mean, you have smart technology. And that can only happen once you've got the powers, because no private company could do this at the moment, because they don't have the power to put in bus gates, for example. So that's the process. It will take some years to get it up and running, but we'll start straight away. Or I'll start straight away, May 24th, if people elect me. And how about that for a vision of transport?
Sounds really good, especially with being safe. And also, I mean, my son lives with me and his dad a week on and off, and he lives in the countryside, and he's learning how to get on a bus and a train. And he said to me, can I not just use this ticket for everything? And I was like, no, sorry, you're gonna have to buy one for the train and then one for the bus. And he was kind of like, well, why can't I? I was like, I couldn't really explain it. It's just like, it's a private company, sorry, you can't.
Well, it's funny, you're talking what the transport policy people would call multimodal transport. That idea that you walk to the bus stop, perhaps, you get a bus to the train station, or you might cycle. At the moment, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, I wouldn't leave my bike locked up in town.
Mine got stolen.
Because it wouldn't be there when you go back.
It got stolen last year at a metro stop. They got seen, and the police still couldn't do anything about it. Group of kids got seen on CCTV and everything. They were like, oh, there's nothing we can do.
So what we do
My bike got.
is we just invest, and these things aren't that expensive. We invest in some proper bike lockers that are also on the app, So you know you can go to the metro station or whatever public transport interchange, put your bike in there, locked, safe, so that it would require someone to come with a big still saw, and the police would intervene at that point. And then you can get on the train or the metro, or ideally take it and ride at the other end, or your e-scooter or whatever else you want to do. I think we'll draw the line at taking horses on trains. I think that era's passed us by.
Scooters?
Scooters, well, e-scooters actually, the biggest problem is people leaving them really inconsiderately, so you can't get a buggy past them and things like that. Yeah. But actually as modes of transport, I think we need better infrastructure, because I'm not sure they're massively safe on the roads, even though that's where you're obliged to ride them at the moment. But yes, as a technology, there is a lot we can do with them. And I think that's where we've got to go.
I think so. It sounds so simple when you lay it out, actually, really, but it seems like it's not something that's being done.
It's always needed the legal powers, which is why I've been negotiating this for the past few years, so that we have that, and they are coming in May 24 now. But then it needs the money, because this idea of building a kind of network so that you get more people in, which then pays for itself, you've got to actually have the money to invest in the first place, which is why I'm having conversations about levering that money in without loading us with a load of debt. And so it does take a lot of lining up to be able to transform a transport system, as you'd expect. But I know we can do it.
Thank you. I have hopes for the future for my son being able to do his apprenticeship, whatever he chooses to do, hopefully at some point. I'm going to start with the questions that we've had submitted. And do we have a Mr. Matt Nash here? Or I think he might have... No? Okay. I'll read this question out for him, or them. When do you anticipate talks with the government about devolution? Trailblazer status will begin, and what additional powers and responsibilities do you hope to see transferred from London to the Northeast? And first of all, just within that, could you explain terms like devolution, trailblazer, and just really go in depth in, well, maybe not too much depth, but yeah, succinctly explain.
It's fair to say that the English haven't got a particularly good history of devolution or explaining it or anything else. So Paul, do you want to...
Oh, I just noticed.
I
was like, oh.
So devolution is some powers come from central government to us. And at the moment, at the North of Tyne, we have control of what's called adult skills, which is for people over the age of 18, so we call it 19 plus education, to do things like train to be a chef, computer skills, welders, tends to be vocational training as opposed to A-levels, or universities, which have their own separate funding streams. And we also have a core budget of £20 million a year, which we use to invest, included in places like this. So we've run supported a lot of things like parent and toddler groups, first aid courses and things like that here, and all over the region. So that's devolution. It's headed by a directly elected mayor, which is me, and that's just a standard election. People go, they vote, they choose the candidates as normal. And you are accountable to central government for what you've achieved. So central government gives us this target that over 30 years we have to create 10,000 brand new jobs that weren't attributable to anything else. We couldn't claim sort of natural growth. Oh, well, we did that. We have to prove that we're responsible for it. And we're on, I think, 4,804 in our pipeline now, after 3 and a bit, coming up 4 years. So we've done nearly half of that in less than 4 years. From a standing start through a pandemic with an energy price crisis and with Liz Truss in power for a few weeks. So I think we've done pretty well there. And that's what devolution is. It's called a combined authority. But what we don't do, all of our powers and funds come from central government. None of it comes from our local authorities. So although it's called a combined authority, it's probably the wrong word, because you're not merging the authorities together, nor are you putting a mayor in charge of them. So inevitably, a lot of people think I am in charge of things that I'm not in charge of. Can you sort out that pothole? Can you empty my bins? And no, that's the local council, particularly planning, which can be very controversial. You know, someone wants to close this road, someone wants to build a new bypass. I'm sorry, that's a decision for your local council. But, you know, if you have an issue, we'll certainly pass it on and amplify your voice. So that's what devolution is. And we're now going from the north of Tyne, which is all the way up to Berwick and all over to Holtwhistle, but we're going to take in Gateshead, South Tyneside, Sunderland, and all of County Durham, all the way over to Barnard Castle. So it'll be a much bigger area with a lot more money. And it's funny when people talk about negotiations, you know, all of us tend to have this image in our mind of political dramas on telly or films, and you know, people sort of marching into the room and sitting down with the suits on opposite sides of the table, and then it cuts to later that night and there's one bloke there with a cigarette and there's a load of empty coffee cups. That's not how you negotiate these things.
So it's not at the thick of it even?
No, it's not. The process, it's a little bit more like courting somebody, which is a nice old-fashioned genteel term. But you have to say, well, are you interested in this? What might be on the table here? And I think I'll stop that analogy there.
I was going to say, this is getting a bit too late night special.
So the process is that it was in my manifesto. I tried to do this, and it was the only way we get transport powers and money. So as soon as I was elected, I started speaking to the leaders south of the river. Are you interested to try and get this new deal? Because it had been tried before and it had collapsed. And there was a difference of opinions, and one of them said, you know what, Jamie, I think you're right, it's absolutely something we need to do, it's better for the region. There was one person said over my dead body, and there was a few said, look, you know, stuff our mouths with gold, we might be interested if the money's good enough. Boris Johnson, Theresa May was Prime Minister when I was elected. It was less than 4 years ago. You know, we've been through a few, haven't we?
It seems like it was a lifetime ago.
And we've had a pandemic in the middle. They weren't interested under Theresa May's government, but when Boris Johnson came in, he said, everyone can have all new powers, levelling up. So I wrote to him and then chased it up with his ministers. And I didn't have a lot of hope that he was an honest man, it's fair to say, and history has proven that right. But I got a letter back from Jake Berry, who was the Northern Powerhouse Minister, and it came on the 31st of October, 2019. I remember that because it was the day the general election was announced. And it said, we have considered your request. We will offer you the power to fine people for smoking on buses. That was going to be levelling up. That letter, you know, freedom of information request, if you want it, it's there. Yeah, and then the election happened. And then straight after, in the January, I got wind that they were going to create something called the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. That spells out CRUSTS as the acronym, but basically it's money for us for our transport system, and we weren't getting it. Manchester was getting it, the West Midlands were getting it, London already has a lot of it. We weren't. So I was in the Treasury, Sajid Javid was the Chancellor at the time. Remember him? Probably not.
Remember the name.
And started talking to the Treasury officials and the junior ministers and made sure that we got it. And it was put in the budget on March the 11th, 2020. So that's 3 years ago now. So that gives you an idea of how much work I've had to put into this. And with that, could then start talking to those in the region who said, look, if the money's good enough. And I said, well, look, we've got this, let's start talking about it. We were hit by COVID, went into lockdown, that slowed things down. But that year, I started talking, while everyone's obviously thinking about the crisis of COVID, I thought people aren't really thinking about how we regenerate the economy when we come out of this. So spoke to ministers and said, can you send me a letter asking me to come up with a plan for the region, which they did. And then convened the region, and for the first time ever, we put in a regional plan for what's called the Comprehensive Spending Review, and it was, we wanted this investment in green skills, we want this investment in transport, we want this investment in education, this investment in housing. And that was the first time we'd started to do this. And then I convened a meeting with a minister, a guy called Luke Hall, who you've probably never heard of, he was a junior minister for a while, and all the regional leaders, and it was like, all right, we'll start talking about this. And there was some saying, look, we're not saying yes, but we're not saying no. And then we're now on to January 2021, and I'm talking to other ministers, Kemi Badenoch, who was a Treasury Minister at the time, about how we could get the money, because when I'd spoken to Jake Berry, we get 20 million a year now, more than doubling the region. He says, oh, well, we've got to acknowledge that with a bit more money. We maybe take it up to 25 million. I said, no, we go up pro rata. We don't lose a penny per person. He says, well, that would make you the biggest devolution deal in the country, you can't have it. And then so started speaking to Treasury ministers, and because of our record at the North of Tyne is so good, for every pound we invest, Treasury gains more than £3 from the jobs we create. So I was saying, you can afford it. And they're like, you make a good case. Then started speaking to get child poverty prevention included based on our existing programme. So spoke to the Education Secretary, who says, actually, I think, yes, we will agree to that. The funding that we're getting through the crusts, the transport money, they were going to say, or in fact did say, well, you already get money for the Tyne and Wear Metro, so we'll take it out of your new money. I said, no. In Manchester, in the West Midlands, people commute on the national heavy rail system. That's funded centrally. Why are we being penalised because we have a cheaper, more effective system in the Metro? So that comes separately. And it was Grant Shapps, who was the Transport Secretary at the time. He says, look, you've convinced me, you've got to convince the Treasury. So I had that discussion with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, a guy at the time was called Simon Clark, and he was saying, you might be right, actually, and managed to get it in there. And then there was the question of, they were wanting to give us 35 million a year. I was saying that's not enough, and haggled, and basically, we went through a process, and we were getting there, and there was only 6 local authorities, because Durham had decided to go another way at one point. And I was still trying to persuade Durham, said, look, it's better for all of us if you're in. You will not get transport money if you don't come with us. And then they looked at that and they tried to negotiate a deal, and they realised they weren't going to get any transport money ever if they went on their own devolution deal, and asked could they come back with us. And I wanted to, and there was some local tensions we had to diffuse, but they did come in. And do you remember when Boris Johnson resigned? It's one of those Kennedy moments, isn't it, where I was actually in London talking to MPs. I've gone down to see ministers and stuff, and people have been trying to get rid of him all year, and I was there 24 hours and he was gone, just saying. I can't really take credit for that. But 57 ministers resigned. Everyone I'd been working with on this deal. My contact book was then useless. And so, oh my God, who do I talk to now? Is this entire deal going to fall apart? And the interim appointment was a guy called Greg Clark, who used to be a Secretary of State for levelling up local government and stuff like that. I'd never met him. So he was appointed, I think, on the Friday, and I had to ring one of the Tories I knew and say, have you got his number? Because if you go through his office, it takes weeks or possibly months to get a meeting in. And we were having a conversation on the Saturday morning. And that bit where I was saying it's a bit like wooing someone, we're just chatting away. And it turns out that he grew up near to where I grew up, and his dad used to deliver milk in our street. And so it's this sort of stuff that you've got to talk to people about. And I was saying, look, Greg, I'm really worried that this deal is going to fall apart. I've sent you this stuff. I've texted you some of this. Can we? What? He's, yeah, all right. And he was, to be fair to him, he took all the calls, he answered, and he helped us keep it on track. This takes us to September last year, when Liz Truss comes in. Greg Clark's dropped. Someone else comes in. Simon Clark, we'd already worked with, trying to get that over. And that was the point at which, because they were saying, if Durham comes in, you still can't have any extra money. Spoke to them, negotiated it, took it from 35 to 48 million. Now, to put that in context, Manchester gets 30 million a year. West Midlands gets 38 million. West Yorkshire gets 38 million. East Midlands gets 38 million. They've all got more people than our deal. We're getting 48 million. So I think we've done a pretty strong job negotiating that. And that is just the core funding. It's £1 billion in the first 3 years. The transport funding gets renegotiated every period of time. And so part of this, part of getting it over the line, was something called Trailblazer. So Trailblazer is just a bit of a buzzword, but the basic idea is, well, let's negotiate some more, even though you've got a deal. So me being me, I've never stopped negotiating and planting ideas, and I've written academic papers, and I've spoken to think tanks across the board to try and get them to plant these seeds in the minds of ministers and senior civil servants to get it through. And we are already negotiating the Trailblazer. So I've had conversations with transport ministers, with Michael Gove, the local government ministers, with housing ministers, loads of ministers, investment ministers, and the things that we're already talking about are further devolution of skills. So that's things like the apprenticeship levy or the skills budget for 16 to 18.
What's the apprenticeship levy?
So the apprenticeship levy is all firms above a certain size have to pay a certain amount per employee, which they're then supposed to use to hire apprentices. Most of them don't spend that money, and Treasury just take it back.
So it's wasted funding, basically.
So yeah, and it just goes into the general pot of Rishi Sunak's private jet. What I want is for us to have it so we can use it to support education here. So that's one of the things we're negotiating, and the careers service, so we can tie it up, so people get good advice.
What benefit will that bring to the North East that we will visually see, be able to immediately and visually see?
So what we would expect to see from that is more young people getting the support they need. One of the tragedies is roughly about half of the people who start an apprenticeship don't finish it.
Half?
Yeah, it's really quite high. And only a very small proportion of that is because they've been offered a job in the meantime. Good luck to them if that's the case. But mostly it's they drop out, it's not what they were expecting, they perhaps weren't supported, they perhaps weren't ready. You know, some people have reached that stage in their life and they're massively disengaged, they've had a bad experience at school. So it's the wraparound support so that people don't fall through the gaps. Now, we already do a lot of that work with our core funding, but I want more money to do more of it so it can help more people. You know, that's basic common sense. So there's 8 things that we're talking about on Trailblazer. One is levelling up zones. Now, some of you might have remembered this in the news, that this was a big Liz Truss policy, and there was a worry that they would remove the environmental protections, they would remove worker protections in these zones and give companies loads of big tax breaks. That was their Liz Truss agenda, to be fair. It was a valid worry, and I'd said, look, there's red lines on this, and we were talking to them. And I've been talking to them ever since. And it was announced yesterday in the budget, we are getting a levelling up zone, but I've got the letter, and it's in writing from the Secretary of State, that they will co-design it with us, that it will need to have the involvement of our universities and research institutes, which is good, and that we will get 80 million over 5 years to support extra infrastructure. So that's why I talk about the core funding, we actually get loads of extra money in. I'm very good at getting money out of government. So that's one of the things that we have been talking about, and it's already going to be delivered now, so that's agreed. One of the things I want and spoke to the Secretary of State about was exclusions from school. In some countries they don't do it, they actually work with the kids. Now, I quite understand if you're in a class as a student or a parent of a student and there is a kid being disruptive, you want it dealt with. But what happens at the moment is these kids go into what's called alternative provision, but it's very patchy. Some places it's good, but some it isn't. And I know of cases of kids being taxied around Northumberland for 3 days a week to get from A to B to just be essentially with a childminder. And no one knows where they are Thursday and Friday, and they're not getting an education. Now, it's not a huge number. It's 0.4% of our secondary school population.
Still.
But that's 0.4% of people who have their lives ruined at that age. And off-rolling is a much bigger problem, and this is where schools perhaps say to kids who aren't going to do well in their exams, or perhaps hard work but don't reach the exclusion threshold, don't worry about not coming in. And then where are these kids going? So that's one of the things I want us to be able to address. And things like school readiness as well, the whole package around education and support for teachers, and teacher recruitment and teacher retention, and better professional development that's much less tick box and much more coaching for teachers. And we are doing that across a number of schools at the moment, and the feedback's astonishing. The teachers are loving it, which is good. I want the power to co-design the heavy rail timetables. Actually, I want it devolved, but I think that there's a wee way before we get there, yeah. And something called fiscal devolution. So I do have the power to raise the precept, to put the council tax up, but I haven't used it. So I haven't cost you a single penny in council tax my entire term. So there's a few people still not even smiling at that. I don't want the power to tax people. I want the power to raise money so that we can invest in things and get it back from the growth afterwards. So for every pound I invest, we return £3 to Treasury. Can we not have actually the first 18 months of that? Because then I can invest more and Treasury will get more and we can invest more. So it's those sorts of things that they've agreed we'll talk about. And some of them, the Regional Wealth Fund has already agreed in the devolution deal.
Gonna make them think it's their idea.
Absolutely, and a lot of that comes from me talking to think tanks, sitting on their panels, and then them talking to me, oh, that's good, we'll put that in there. So the investment zones, yesterday we were talking about something like a levelling up board. That was my idea in the first place. On housing, I want the power to regulate the private rented sector. For a number of reasons. There are good landlords, they don't want bad landlords out competing them in a race to the bottom. You know, this works for a better system, and you want to reward the people who uphold good standards. But that would allow us to do things like making sure they had energy efficiency in them, and the landlords can either find the money themselves, or we would advance the money, but then we would put it as a charge on the property, just like a mortgage, and then it gets paid back to us over time. But that allows us to have better, warmer. For every 42 pence you spend insulating a home through what's called retrofit, sorry, for every pound you spend on it, you save the NHS 42p. This saves us money, you know, and it's better for the planet. It's something we should be doing. It's such common sense. We want to be setting up digital hubs so that everybody has access to better internet. And above all, I want what's called consolidated funding. Anyone who follows the news will hear government's giving a little bit on that levelling up bid and some there, and you're getting a little bit for Blythe Town Centre, and you're going to get some for a new swimming pool. Just give us the money so we can plan this strategically, because then it'll all join up. Because then we can make sure the buses are running to the swimming pool, getting the whole thing. So that's what we've done. Or that's what I've been talking to government about. As I say, it's been largely me talking about that. But this here is the North East Devolution deal. It's the actual deal signed by everybody. That's going through, at the moment, public consultation, and then it will have to be signed off. Now it'll have to go to Parliament, and then it'll be law.
I feel like I'm in This Is Your Life.
Yes, this is my red book. So I think that might answer his question. It was a bit long, that one, wasn't it?
Very in-depth, but it's necessary because it's actually really important.
Yeah, it is. This is democracy in action.
This is it, and this is very, especially when you talk about teachers as well, you know, with strikes going on the last couple of days, it's more important than ever, really, because we are seeing a real decline in, I think, people just tired, aren't they? There's a decline in people's feeling of positivity at the moment. And if you can hear there are actually some positives to take away from it, then it gives you a little sense of hope that something is being done behind the scenes that we don't necessarily know about. So thank you for answering.
Yeah. And I do, you know, have to obviously negotiate in private if you're going to get there.
Yeah, but it's nice to feed it back to the public then.
It is, yeah. I'm tempted as I am. I'm not one of these politicians who spends the time saying this is all government's fault. There's plenty of other people do that, and people already know that. I'd actually much rather fix it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask, and we had an email, unless Graham Cansdale from TUSC North Tyneside is in the room? No? Okay. Thank you for your commitment to diversity and equality across the North East. What can the combined authority do to combat the far right, the rise of the far right in the region, especially in places like North Tyneside? And the same footing, we had a question from Tony Coletti, and that was by email, and I'm assuming they're not in the room either. What is you, going to do about the homelessness epidemic in Newcastle, whilst hotels are being used to house illegal immigrants? So one, yin and yang.
Yeah. Well, if we pick up on the homelessness point, as I was explaining about devolution, that is the local authority's remit. And when we use phrases like homelessness, it's actually a really complex spectrum. From the people who are most visible, the street homeless, the people we see sleeping in shop doorways, they often have very complex needs around perhaps substance addiction, serious mental health problems. Frequently, they may have a place in a hostel, but they feel very uncomfortable there for various reasons, and they're not in a great state of mind anyway. They might be people trying to sell them drugs in these places. So, and then the other end of it is homelessness is people who might still be living somewhere nice and warm, but they're 35 and living with their parents and kind of want to move out and can't afford to, and a whole spectrum in between. So the local authorities do provide, there is a space for everybody every night in Newcastle.
I've heard that about Newcastle, actually. I know it's one of the cities that actually you can find somewhere to sleep most nights.
Yeah.
But again, you can't go in there if you've got substance abuse, for example. So this is the problems.
And that is the difficulty of getting people to engage with services that are going to make them well again, which have been slashed to the bone. So it's both a public health problem, and it's an NHS problem, and it's a housing problem, and inevitably a law and order problem, because a lot of these things end up being tied in with drugs. So they're things that are not in my remit to fix. But what we do is lobby government about it to get these things, because that is ultimately the way through. But there was some language in there which I think feeds into the rise of the far right question. While hotels are full of illegal immigrants. Now, this is an issue that's been in the news with Gary Lineker and government ministers having to pop it in and then getting the BBC to ban him, and then everybody on the BBC saying, we stand with Gary Lineker. So hats off to everybody. There is a lot of hope and a lot of decency out there. Well, let's just look at a few of the facts here. In December, the Prime Minister said the government was paying £5.5 million a day to accommodate asylum seekers, not illegal immigrants, in hotels. And they're not staying in five-star hotels, and ordering room service. In 2020, asylum seekers waited 440 days on average, more than a year, to get their claims processed. If they were unaccompanied children, it was 550 days. Staying in cheap accommodation, in hotels, unable, not literally, legally not allowed to go and work, even if they have skills. Trapped in four walls, in a hostile environment, deteriorating mental health. And the permanent secretary of the Home Office, a guy called Sir Philip Rutnam, he pointed out that the role of the asylum officers who process these claims, it was downgraded in 2014 from what's called senior executive officers to executive officers, basically a pay cut for all the staff. Mm-hmm. And a load left, and there was a massive churn, and 10 years ago, each officer processed 14 cases a month. Now each officer processes just 4 cases a month. So by taking away skilled workers, the system's ground to a halt, which is why people are waiting for so long. It's no good for anyone. But I want to clarify that language. It is not possible to be an illegal asylum seeker. Asylum is you are fleeing persecution or danger, and you have a right to ask asylum. The only illegal thing is if you have had your claim and your appeal turned down, and you then don't leave. Yep. These people are not in hotels, and there are actually very, very few of them. And the proportion is no greater than crime amongst any section of society, including Tory MPs.
It's like they class
they're a bit higher.
People's asylum seekers, if there are the odd person that will be a criminal, because in any country we're getting a criminal. But it's like we will accept criminals that were born in the UK if they look fit right. But
Well, we will accept criminals who went to Eton and got elected as Prime Minister, it seems.
It's true. And also, when you're talking about legal routes, I remember watching a panel discussion with, I can't remember her name, Suella
Braverman.
Yeah, Suella Braverman. And was it her that she was talking, people were asking about are there any legal routes? There are no legal routes for people to come and claim asylum. Yet, when the Ukraine war started, there was suddenly a legal route for people to come. But yet, that was put in place straight away, but yet there are no other illegal routes. So they were like, well, how do you get here legally? Absolutely.
And we talk about illegality. This is a government whose own policy for deporting people to Rwanda was deemed to be illegal, who have admitted this latest thing they're trying to push through is illegal under international law. So I think where does the balance, who should be calling who illegal here? So it was Suella Braverman who used that line, Guardian reading, tofu eating, woke karate.
That's me.
I did a lot of martial arts, but I've never done woke karate.
I have. Every day is a woke karate day for me. But yeah, I think that language is really, really interesting because my family probably would have been classed as illegal immigrants, and even they came over via Windrush pretty much, or the call for Windrush, but they weren't accepted, but they wanted to work, and they were part of the British Empire as well, but they would probably now still be seen as illegal immigrants in some way because they've come to have a better life, but with brown skin they wouldn't really be accepted, or they'll be viewed as illegal immigrants because of what they look like.
I mean, anybody.
How do you know as well? How do you know if you're just walking down the street or you see someone in a hotel, how do you know that they're an illegal immigrant? Just by looking?
Or indeed an immigrant.
Yeah.
Or indeed, even if you're white, you may be an immigrant.
Exactly.
And we've got people who are refugees from Ukraine working in the Combined Authority.
But they were allowed to work straight away.
Yeah.
Which is a difference.
And that's a really key thing here.
And,
is...
we all might end up being, from climate, we might all end up fleeing one day.
We might. When we talk about refugees, there's a couple of, and particularly asylum seekers, there's two laws that I think really need changing. One is what's called no recourse to public funds.
Hostile environment.
Where people can't even go and get training courses about language or how to work their way through a very complicated and hostile system. And the other one is you're not allowed to work. How crazy is that? You've got people who are massively skilled, and often it is the most skilled people who are able to escape from a country.
Yeah, because they had money in that country as well.
Absolutely.
It's like they think that they were poor when they left. A lot of asylum seekers actually had jobs when they left.
Well, I've spoken to an anaesthetist who escaped from Syria, and he was saying, I'm an anaesthetist. Why am I not allowed? And his English was fine. And he was saying, why am I not allowed? You've got a shortage of anaesthetists. This is crazy. I'm quite happy to do a test and show that I know what I'm doing. But no. So that's absolutely what needs to be done. There are things that we do at the North of Tyne. We fund, for example, there are many programs, but one is with the Action Foundation, and this is about digital exclusion. So we help people. Now, everybody who's tried using a computer system knows how frustrating it is. Imagine doing that in a language that isn't your own, your native language. And so we help people who are refugees, who have settled status, fund them to work with asylum seekers to guide them through, but also speaking to someone who speaks their language, massively good for their well-being, and that's the sort of thing. Newcastle's a city of sanctuary. The whole region, I think, should be the city of sanctuary, and I think our whole country should be, because we define ourselves, I think, by how we treat others at that time of need.
And it could happen to us all one day. That's it. You may not be a legal immigrant now, but you may be one day through no fault of your own, and then do you lead by example? That's the question.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that, Jamie. I've got a question from Dawn Marshall that came by email. Dawn? No? Okay. This is quite a long-winded one, so bear with me. It's great to see you're engaging with people in this way. Let's have more of this. 4 billion is a drop in the ocean, considering what type of infrastructure investment needs to be made in the region after many years of neglect by the Tories. And I'm reading this verbatim, by the way. I didn't just add that little bit in myself. Promise.
I'm allowed to be political.
Yeah, I'm keeping neutral. Research has shown deaf people are more likely to be A, out of work, B, have higher percentage of mental health issues, C, more dependent upon benefits due to being financially better off on benefits than working, D, employers not wanting to take on deaf people due to health and safety or other issues, E, leave school with no GCSEs or very low grades due to a failing education system set up working against deaf people rather than with deaf people. These are just a handful of the numerous negatives working against us. With funding like the 4 billion, which is already earmarked for some of the region's infrastructure and your own budget, it will be interesting to know, as Mayor, how do you intend to work with deaf people and deaf-led organisations, like becoming visible on policy issues, which, in brackets, which does not necessarily cost pounds, but common sense, to invest in us and allow us to contribute to the region's economy, history, culture, skills, education, and so on?
That's a really great question. Was it Dawn?
Yeah, Dawn.
Really great question, Dawn. And if you're at home, hello. And that point about contributing to the region, you can contribute in so many ways as well. About culture, about diversity, our economy, our history, our education. And there's a number of things that we are doing already. This is a new devolution deal. We already have one, of course. As we can see, we have our BSL interpreters here. And I'm watching what that is because I want to know what the sign is for BSL interpreter. And we...
Sorry.
So it's worth bearing in mind as well that when we talk about people who are deaf, there is an intersectionality issue. That if you have, for example, multiple sensory disabilities, it's even more acute. It's one of those things that everybody faces barriers in their life, everybody, one way or another. But if you've grown up in poverty, you face another barrier. If you've grown up with a disability, you have another barrier. If you are a minoritized community, you have another barrier. If you're a woman, you have another barrier. If you are, and I could go on and list all of them, but you get the idea. And that's why we ran our equalities assembly, but we didn't categorize it for the deaf, blind, people with mobility disabilities, etc., because so much of it is about intersectionality. And we've run our equalities assemblies, and they inform our policy work, and we're working with employers to get them to do things that make a difference, such as, for example, if you apply to be a cleaner, I'll not name the organisation, it's an organisation that is a good employer in other respects, you have to fill in the same form as a highly skilled professional. Well, why do you have to do that? And if you might have a challenge around, say, literacy, severe dyslexia or dyspraxia or something like that, or different forms of neurodiversity, why would you force someone to do that to get a job that they're capable of doing? So it's that sort of program that's making a difference. We have actually, my director of policy and performance is deaf. And it was an interesting thing. When we'd spoken to the recruitment agent, said that this woman's deaf. He's like, well, if she can do the job, yeah. And we make reasonable adjustments. So we don't talk on the telephone, we Zoom, because she's an expert lip reader. And it is about getting lived experience in. And it doesn't really matter what the problem is. There are experts in terms of policy, there are experts in terms of policy design, but there are experts who've lived it. And that doesn't matter whether you're designing a better bus service or designing a skills program for deaf people so they can contribute and have a much more enriching life. Nothing about us without us. So that's getting people's lived experience. So we are doing this, and we want to continue to do it and feed it in. To give you one example, we have a program that's running as part of developing the film and screen industry in the Northeast called Making Creativity Work, which is helping people get links in to get the skills, but also directly with the links and the interviews into BBC production and skills and filmmaking. So that's one of the things that you can do.
And I can relate to that, what you were saying about how I've got neurodiversities and I have dyspraxia and other things. And I find, like, when I speak, I stumble, but also when I'm writing application forms, for example, I am really thankful when I see an application form, you can send in a video instead. And there should be different medias and forms where you don't have to fill out a really long form to explain yourself, or why can't we figure out ways to make things more accessible for everybody? Why do we have to have this kind of archaic way of applying for jobs, or archaic way of having, I can't think of other examples right now, stumbling over myself, but you know what I mean. It's like we have this paint by number way of doing everything, and it doesn't work for everybody. And it's understanding that.
So interesting that so many employers actually want to be good employers and want to fix this. And it's just either habit or
non-lived experience.
Resource
or they don't speak to people who have lived experience.
Yeah. And so that's a big role that we play.
And I think you were right about, when we talk about disabilities or neurodiversities, it's important for us to not just concentrate on one, but actually focus as a whole and make everything accessible to everybody. And speak to everyone who has lived experience, because when I speak about conditions that I have, people don't even know what I'm talking about, and the effect that it can actually have on you. And when you stumble over your words, you end up feeling really stupid. Bang in there. But there are ways around it, and what you said, about having people with lived experience, I think is really, really important.
And there's some employers are missing out on some real gems as well. People who may not fit the initial criteria of that's the sort of person I'm looking for. And we all feel more comfortable with people who are like us. It's kind of innately human. But realizing that somebody who might have a disability that you hadn't considered might be an absolute genius in some areas. Let's have their skill and contribution. And
being, like you say, we are comfortable with people around us, but having the richness of people that aren't like us is where we learn the most important things.
We always make better decisions with a more diverse group of thinkers.
Very true. Thank you for that. I've got another question from Jodie Lee G in Kielder. Not in the room? Okay.
You definitely can't get a bus from here to Kielder easily.
Not at this time of night, anyway. Since recycling services only come round once a fortnight, Could we get better recycling facilities closer to our village so we can recycle properly, without having to drive 70 miles approx round trip? And also we have a question from Paul Miskin, which leads into this question as well. I know Paul personally, so I know he's not in the room now. Since energy is very expensive and excess illumination is destroying endangered biodiversity, why not form an extraneous lighting removal team? Extraneous lighting removal team, and either turn off or fit with motion sensors all extraneous public lighting and ban all night illuminated advertising.
Was it Jodie?
It was Jodie Lee.
Jodie Lee.
Yeah.
That's a lot of recycling.
Yeah.
Good. You know, I don't know. Maybe Jodie Lee runs a business as well.
Or just drinks a lot of booze. A lot of bottles.
May or may not drink a lot of bottles.
I said maybe drinks.
but it's good the recycling them. This is one of those things I was talking about, that it's the local authorities are responsible for refuse in all its forms, recycling, waste, emptying the bins, the whole thing. And if you are in Kielder, then I would imagine you're going to struggle for a lot of facilities. This is why we do need a better transport system. I know a lot of people want the cars that, you know, it's good that people to be able to use their cars, and we've got to transfer towards much cleaner cars, electrics, hybrids, and so on. But we also do need public transport systems for people in these remote rural areas. But anyway, the answer is that's not my power to run it. That is Northumberland County Council in the case of Kielder, or local council, wherever you might be. But if people do have an issue, a bit like an MP would, we might just advocate on their behalf. So if people want to come in, we'll amplify it and we'll pass it on to the council and say, this person has raised this issue, can you contact them directly, as opposed to coming through us, because it'll just slow it down if they have to wait for me to get on it as well.
To get in contact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And about Paul's as well.
Oh yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Illumination and biodiversity. There was an aquarium, I think it was in Germany, where the lights kept tripping. The whole electricity system kept going off. And none of the electricians could work out why, because it wasn't anything to do with the earth circuit or anything like that. And the staff spent the night in the aquarium, and what they saw was the octopus climb out of its tank or up to the edge of it, squirt water at the light, a 2,000 watt lamp, to short it out, and then the light could go off so the octopus could go back to sleep.
Oh wow, that's true. Wow,
now,
no way.
I'm not saying that's what we're going to attract in Newcastle if we have less light. Otto the octopus was his name. That was the name he was assigned. Yeah, maybe something different in Octopody, I don't know. But that does show that we don't tend to think of light pollution affecting the behaviour of animals and diversity.
Although it affects us and we're animals.
But it affects us, as anybody knows, who wakes up early when it's sunny and can't get back to sleep. It's why we often have blackout curtains for our kids, if there's a street light outside. So it does matter. Now this, again, that comes into this is a local authority issue, but I'll certainly advocate for it. Now, on the other hand, we do have to be mindful of illumination from point of view of safety. And I think Paul addresses that in his question when he talks about, well, look, there is a way around it, to put motion sensors on, it's just the extraneous lighting. And particularly a lot of advertising boards. Now, I personally find, aren't we bombarded with information? Buy this, look like that, eat this, do this now, and you really must do this now. Yeah, oh, you've missed out on a sharper pencil. I can live without it. So I think there's a strong case, actually, I would like to see, and this is a local authority issue, so this is just me ranting about it, but I would actually like to see a much more sympathetic environment about information pollution, about the stuff we're bombarded with. I don't know why I need so many pizza leaflets through my letterbox. I was just like, there's the recycling, because that's all I'm going to do. I'm not even going to look at them.
And also, like, lights on in shops when you're walking throughout on a Friday, Saturday night. Why do we need this many lights on in shops? Central Motorway has a big advertising board, which is really distracting. that's on all day and night. Why do we need that? There just seems to be an abundance of movable billboards, like moving billboards, which I'm really shocked. And I'm very easily distracted again, having neurodiversity as well. You know, I'm driving along in my car and it really is very distracting. And I was thinking back to, when I'd read this question, I was thinking back to when I was at a festival many, many years ago. It was a festival not far from here actually. And there was a lovely fireworks display. You know, I really thought fireworks were amazing. And then as the fireworks were going off, it was next to a lake, and there was a duck and her ducklings, and the fireworks had really disturbed all the ducks and ducklings, and they were just running around quacking, screaming, and it was just horrible to see. And I'd never really actually seen an example of what light and sound pollution does to animals. And I honestly cannot enjoy fireworks anymore because of that image. So every time I say firework, I just think of these poor ducks just quacking away and freaking out at their environment. And you know, it's noise and light pollution as well. I think noise pollution as well has a big part to play. And these lights, we can't hear it, but actually they're probably buzzing. And these animals can hear that constant buzz as well of these lights. And I think it's something that we don't really think about enough.
Yeah. I think when it comes to illumination, we should design it much less about the can I sell my stuff, and much more from the public safety point of view. So Unite the Union run a Get Me Home Safely campaign, which is both for people who've been out on a night, but particularly people who are then coming home later, the people who've been at work, because there is very little public transport, and we can't assume that people can afford cars or even have somewhere to park them if they're in town or whatever else the issue is. So I think that's what we should be focusing around: illumination and motion sensors, and the appropriate use of CCTV and various apps to keep people travelling safe, and check-in apps and things like that. But above all, I think we need a responsibility when we talk about illumination to just tackle violent behaviour and just zero tolerance on it.
More lighting in rural areas where this lighting's needed, but also switch off those lights in shops. Find them, switch them off. Well, thank you very much.
Or we'll set onto the octopus on them.
Yeah, just put an octopus in every location, squirt some ink at the end. I think as well, I know that you, in terms of that, we were talking about a repair cafe as well, in terms of lighting and having things fixed, reusable energy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is the case that we throw away more stuff than we really need to. There's the North of Tyne runs a crowdfunded programme. So if members of the community have an idea, and they can demonstrate lots of other people in the community have an idea because they've made very small donations, we will put a large amount of money in to help get that idea off the ground. And one of these is a repair cafe, and it's up in Rothbury. So the local community decided they want to do this, and it's helped them get the tools and the space. But it's great on lots of levels. So you get people who might have a lot of skill in something, frequently older people who've retired, not always. And someone will come down and say, look, my Hoover's stopped working. Rather than throwing it away and getting, oh, right, we fix that. But then it's also people feeling useful, people feeling valued, contributing, and it's dealing with social loneliness. So these are the sorts of things. If people have ideas, do get in touch. We do fund dozens and dozens of projects all over the place. Beekeeping on the Meadowell, beach wheelchairs and colour coats, rewilding back lanes in Heaton, community gardens in Scotswood. There's loads of stuff. And that again feeds into this idea of, about recycling and repurpose of things, which I think that's a massive way to address recycling, is to actually not be chucking kettles away. Although that reminds me of Boris Johnson now when I think about kettles. Just go and don't buy a new kettle, get it fixed. Or the gold wallpaper.
Okay, I've got another question from Nick Simpson. Again, not in the room. What are your long-term goals in terms of housing within the North East? Do you intend on setting minimum standards or concrete goals in terms of housing, density, energy performance, such as passive house, right? Or mix of tenure? Do you have any other particular plans or ambitions in terms of the way we develop and progress our local neighbourhoods?
Was that Nick?
Yeah, Nick Simpson.
That is a really good question. Planning is one of these things that sits with the local authorities and not the combined authority, and even in the New Deal, I won't have planning powers. However, there are planning powers that currently exist that local authorities can use to insist on higher environmental standards. And it's something that's called the Merton Rule, and the London Borough of Merton started to use this in around about 2002. It might not be exactly that year. And that requires houses to have a level of micro generation. That means a solar panel on the roof, typically. And the easiest way to hit that threshold where perhaps 10% of your energy has to be is to better insulate the house. And the highest standard of insulation is what's called passive house, an idea developed in Germany. And these are houses that, and there are examples of them that exist, that are so energy efficient that you don't need any heating. Now that saves a fortune, but it also keeps them reasonably cool in the summer as well. So it's good. But they require extra investment up front when you build them. And that's why we need higher standards. Now, to get party political for a moment, the government brought this in I think about 2006, the then Labour government. And it was called the Net Zero Home Standard. So that within 10 years, 2016, every new home had to be zero carbon. And George Osborne, the Conservative Chancellor, repealed it in 2015, 6 months before it was due to come on the books. So all the houses that we've had built in the last 8 years would have been better insulated, have had heat pumps, would have had microgeneration. In the middle of the energy crisis, imagine the difference that would have made. It costs around £5,000 to properly insulate a house when you're building it. The full retrofit to do it after the house has been built can cost up to £25,000. It should be already in there. And then there's the design of them and are they accessible to public transport? Because a lot of new estates have wiggly roads, make it hard to get a bus down. So there's so much needs to be done on that. And I was talking earlier about getting the power to regulate the private rented sector. And what I would love to see is a change in the law so that local authorities can build council houses without worrying about having them sold out from underneath them, because in effect they are loss making, which is why it doesn't happen. They can build them, but they haven't got the money to do it. I hope that answers Nick's question. The answer is I don't have the powers, but there are things we're doing. We are, with our Brownfield Housing Fund, where we do have money for government to remediate sites. That's where there might have been a factory there and there's heavy metals in the soil, or a site is just on too big a slope, so no one will build on it. We do have that power and we've used that. And actually it's only about half a mile over there, the Rise in Scotswood, which is a partnership between a developer and Newcastle City Council, and that was up and running before I was elected. But the second phase in it, we've built this massive retaining wall, and it's called the Great Wall of Scotswood. And you probably can see it from space at the right angle, it's big. We've used that to open up a load of land, so it's flat now. So there's this big retaining wall, this flat land. And these are houses on mixed ownership models, so some buy to rent, some loads of affordable homes on there that people can buy, some that are permanent rented by the developer, which is partly publicly owned. And it has built into it a district heating system with a heat exchanger for every house, so that people get lower energy bills, and that heating can be, it needs to be switched on, they're just developing at the moment, but it can be zero carbon heating with biomass.
And how do we stop these sort of initiatives becoming sort of gentrified, or in the future, how do we do that?
This is where community-led housing really comes into its own. So this is something that, because we had the pandemic, it slowed down a lot of the things that we could do. But we're working up a number of proposals, and I'm lining up the funding in place to get a lot of perhaps older buildings, a pub that no one lives, there's never going to be a pub again, and we know that, retrofit it to turn it into a number of nice apartments, or a big massive house, whatever. But then you would have that where the people who live there collectively own it on a cooperative model, but it's managed by a company that you pay the fee to, which is so it has the experience of a private landlord, but you own it, can't be kicked out of it, no notice. It ends automatically, no fault evictions. People know they can live there, stay there, build a life there if they choose to. But at the same time, it can't ever be sold on, because one of the problems with affordable homes is the first time it's affordable, but then it's not affordable after that, is it? And that's where gentrification comes in.
It's that model of, buy it, I got it for cheap, buy it, sell it for more.
Yeah, and I know of cases where people have told someone, well, you just live there as a tenant, I'll buy it, we'll do it in your name, and then they sell it off. And there's people essentially ripping off the public purse on that basis. So it's what's called an asset lock, where in perpetuity, the people who live there own it. And they can move out and someone else can move in. And it's really common around the world. It's just in this country we think that's radical.
Yeah, I know in Germany they have like good things about, well, renting is much more common.
And the United States, which we think of as regressive compared to us, it's fairly standard for people who live in a condo to be on the board and where they collectively run it.
Yeah, they have like a community board, don't they? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that, Jamie. I've got a question from Michelle Quill. No? Okay.
Nothing.
Say sorry? Go on. What is Jamie's approach to culture? We know from research on audiences that working class people like me don't have equal access to cultural experiences, that we don't have equal access to careers in the cultural industries, and that we're not fairly represented in cultural experiences. We also know that there is a lot of precarious, short-term work in the cultural industries. What are Jamie's plans for addressing these problems?
Well, there's a lot of questions in that.
At least 4.
What is my approach to culture? I think that raises the question of what is culture. There was a big story, some people might have seen in the news a few weeks back, about the opera moving from London up north, and there was a lot of ridiculous anti-northern prejudice about northern culture. We've all read Shakespeare too, and we do get the telly.
Yeah. Do we?
But culture, in essence, is the things that we do for our edification, to spend time with each other, what we do for fun. And that could be going to football. One of the biggest cultural institutions in the Northeast is Newcastle United Football Club, or Sunderland, or Blythe Spartans. And then you start to look at things like working class culture, as it tends to be called, like the Durham Miners Gala, which is a wonderful institution. I ran a fundraiser for them just a few weeks ago. And I always find it massively moving, marching with the brass bands and seeing the people on the field. And slightly less moving a couple of hours later when people are staggering around because they've had too much to drink. But that is also, I suppose, a part of culture. And I was talking to Ken Loach just 2 nights ago, did an event with him. And
He's the director, by the way.
The film director who did I, Daniel Blake, and Sorry We Missed You, and The Old Oak's coming out now. So that's his last 3 films he's done in the Northeast. And one of the questions was, what would you say to someone starting out in film? And he said, tell people to make a living for it. Don't do it for no money, pro bono. Don't just think, oh, well, I'll make it anyway and put it out on the internet and someone will see it. And he says, there are jobs for electricians, there are jobs for set designers. It's not all about being on screen or being a writer. These are jobs in the cultural industry. And he says, earn a living at it because you deserve one if you are doing this job. And often in culture, there's this horrible phrase that gets used, oh, well, we'll give you the exposure. No, if you want someone to do it, you pay them for it. And that has to be the approach. So there's a lot of things that we've done. We're working with New Writing North to set up a Northern Writing Hub where we're bringing publishers from London to be based here. This is along Clayton Street, near Central Station, fitting out that building in conjunction with Northumbria University, so that we actually have a writing home here. And there'll be opportunities for people in that. We run a program called Making Creativity Work, which is specifically for disabled people, including deaf people, to get an opportunity in screen and the film industry. We run a whole range of what the government calls skills boot camps. But these are opportunities for people to get skills specifically in film and media and other professions peripheral to that. We've set up our culture and creative zones, one in Berwick, one in Newcastle, one in North Tyneside, where this is about creating more opportunities for small businesses. Boho Arts have just been the latest one in our crowdfunder, which is near the Centre for Life, an old building not in use, to create a new arts centre. So there's loads going on, and it's about getting that little bit of critical mass. And one of the things that we're doing is our events program. Now, in the past, events have tended to be There's a national event goes on and you pay a bit of money to bring it here, but the work comes in from outside, and then when they go, they leave. What I want and what we're doing is supporting businesses that are going to run the festivals here permanently. So the festival, whatever it might be, might only run for a couple of days, or might only run for a few hours, like the Great North Run. But there's 50 people have full-time jobs year-round in the Great North Run Company. And if we have the Newcastle Improv Festival here, well, that will take a year to organise. Probably not for 50 people, maybe a couple of people. But those jobs are then there year-round. And that's the sort of difference that we can make. We've just put, collectively, we've put something in, our other local authority partners have put in money as well, just over 11 million to match 25 million from the BBC to set up the new film studios in our region that's been missing for ages. And the pioneering work that people like Ken Loach have done filming some films here have helped get us on the map with that. So there is a lot of stuff to do, but the question's dead right. If you are someone who doesn't have a lot of privilege, how do you do this, work for free and get exposure to get your name out there? We've got to absolutely make sure that people are paid properly in these industries, backed by our Good Work Pledge.
And also changing the idea of what culture is seen as. Why is going to the opera more cultural than going to watch a film? Which, to me, both are equal to me. I would probably prefer to go and watch a film. But I've been called uncultured before because I didn't want to go to a festival that was a bit more sustainable than going to another festival. So I got called uncultured. And I was like, well, why does that make me uncultured? Because I'm not interested in that. It's not shaming people for their interests, which to them is culture.
Music, performance art, sport is culture. Growing flowers in your allotment is culture. There's a whole range of things, absolutely.
And I think the North East does actually have quite a wealth of cultural endeavours, but again, it's a way of seeing it as a cultural endeavour. I know that there's now a queer group that are doing, it's at the Newbury Centre and it's called Topsoil, and they are starting a new queer gardening programme. And to me that's cultural, but to someone else, they'll be like, well, that's not cultural. Going to the opera is cultural, or going to this place is cultural. But there are quite a lot of things in the North East, I think, that are going on, but it's how we have to change our mindset on culture.
Absolutely.
And also mixing with other cultures to gain more culture, which I think is super important. Well, thank you for answering that, Jamie. Got our next question from Maggie Mound on behalf of Divest Tyne and Wear campaign. It says, hello, Jamie. I understand that you are a champion of green energy and green jobs. You've called upon the Tyne and Wear Pension Fund, a fund that we as a council taxpayers contribute to divest from dirty and polluting fossil fuels such as oil, gas and coal before, hang on, I don't know if I'm reading this right. I'm going to start again. I understand that you are a champion of green energy and green jobs. You've called upon the Tyne and Wear Pension Fund, a fund that we all as council taxpayers contribute to divest from dirty and polluting fossil fuels such as oil, gas and coal before their planned date of 2050. In view of the fact that you and your staff are members of the pension fund, what pressure can you bring to bear upon the pension fund elected councillors who run the pension fund? I hope I read that right, Maggie.
Well, it made sense, certainly.
Okay, all right. There's a bit more actually.
Oh yes,
That's
good.
Okay. Do you support the Divest UK Day of Action on Friday the 24th of March to highlight this issue, and in particular the campaign by Divest Tyne and Wear locally? Are you able to support the local campaign events on the 24th of March?
So, short answer to that second question, yes, I do support it. I've been engaging with the Tyne and Wear Pension Fund for some while, trying to persuade them, I'm not in control of it in any way, but trying to lobby them to take money out of investments in fossil fuels and put it into other things. Now, there's not just them, but there is sometimes this attitude amongst finance funds who claim, but by being invested in these funds, we can shape them to be more green. Now, I don't believe that works. And you've only got to look at what Shell have just done, and BP. BP have unilaterally just halved their target for emissions reduction. So I don't think we should be investing in that. We should be investing in the alternatives. And this is something that we can really start to make a difference on. We want pension funds to get a return because it is our money. and it's the money you're going to live on when you retire. And at the same time, though, we want a better world for our kids and our grandkids. So we should be able to do the two things together. And one of the things that my team are working with them is to try and persuade them by developing propositions here that they can invest in. So that not only are they getting the returns from their pension, but it's making our area better by creating more jobs or a better environment or investing in facilities here that they get the money back from and they get the benefit of using. So it's this real win-win. And I think we're probably about the first people, I think we are the first people who've done this anywhere in the country. We've set up a fund that we're putting money into. We're getting money from universities, we're getting money from pension funds coming in. Sadly, not Time We Invest pension fund yet, but other pension funds, to create what's called a venture capital fund. But this is to support local businesses. So that often people have a great idea and they've got a lot of skill, they want to set up a business, they can't get the support here. So they go to Cambridge or Oxford, where it's much better supported. We're making the money available here so that these businesses can grow here. So the families of the pensioners of the Time Weir pension fund, if they were invested in it, would be benefiting from that. And that's the approach we've got to take. And then move towards the idea where you can get a bond in the region and people who want to invest some money, who have some money, and some people do, they can invest knowing that it's making a difference to their region. So that's what we do. If we want people to divest from gas and oil, it will go quicker if we give them something else to invest in. Yeah. But Maggie Mound's dead right, and yes, I will back them, I'll continue to.
Thank you very much. It's about giving them something better to invest in for the environment, which I think sums it up pretty well. Okay, I've got my last question, and this is from Carol Hawkins, who I'm assuming is not here either. Simply asks, what happened to the People's Bank?
Well, that actually flows on from the last question, doesn't it?
Can you explain what that is?
So the idea of People's Bank is a bank that is owned collectively by the people of the region. And it was one of the things that I said we'd do in the manifesto. And the basic idea is you set up a bank, so we as the combined authority would fund the work for that, but then everybody who's saving with the bank or borrowing from the bank collectively owns it. And all of the profits get ploughed back into it, as opposed to going to shareholders, which is what happens at the moment, or bankers' bonuses, which are outrageously high. And that bank, we started the development work on it, got people together working on it, produced the business plan. We had it evaluated by an independent accountancy firm who looked through it, and they said, yep, that works. It will break even in 4.5 years. It'll be turning a profit at year nine. Any money that you put in, you'd get 7.5% a year back. So we would actually have an asset in the region that we would own to fund other good projects and public services. And then COVID came along. And then right at the point we were going to start the market research. And we thought, well, A, you can't because it was lockdown. But secondly, all small businesses, which is a key part of the model because it's about economic activity, economic development. They were never going to shift banks in the middle of that crisis when they had bounce back loans and overdrafts and a whole range of things. And not knowing how long COVID was going to go on for, which nobody did, and on and off. I mean, it's one respect, we still haven't come out of it. All the economic effects are still there. So even now, it'd be very hard to get people to shift banks. So diverted it into setting up that fund. So that's the fund, £50 million fund, which is just being signed off, which is going through, which will launch in a couple of months' time openly to get the businesses to invest, get the investment out of it. And then that will grow and grow and grow. So that's operational. That's getting us the support for the small businesses we need. It's recycling the money in our region, and it's getting that benefit of it coming back to us so that we can continue to spend that money over and over again. We were talking about recycling earlier. This is recycling the money, which is the best way to do it, so we don't have to raise taxes on hard-working people who can't afford it. So that's what we're doing, and then backing that up, I'll create a second fund, which is coming online a few months afterwards, called the Social Finance Fund, which is specifically to support businesses that are trading in either worker-owned businesses or community-owned businesses and cooperatives for a social purpose. And this is not just things like community cafes, but this is one of the biggest problems is if you have a company and perhaps the owner and manager's retiring, it often gets sold to another company. And then they take the orders and they take some of the technology if they have it, and then they move some of the staff, and then you look at these things, 2 or 3 years' time, the jobs have gone from our region. So this is saying, look, if you want to set up your own business by doing what you're doing now and running it and owning it, you know, who has £150,000, £1 million spare? You know, people don't. But we'll say, we'll put that investment in. And yes, we'll own it, but you can run it, and you can, over time, you come to own it as you pay that off. So that's a fund, again, that's available, which is doing exactly what the People's Bank was going to do, but it's online now and faster as a result of COVID.
That's great. And I think, I think people don't even realise that the impact that things like COVID has had on those things that look small, but actually has a significant impact. But also we're learning from COVID that things can be done in a much more streamlined way.
Yeah, Zoom.
Yeah.
Blessing and a curse, but when it's raining outside, it's more of a blessing, isn't it?
When you want to stay in your PJs with the camera off.
Yes. Actually, it might have even been this suit and tie on, and I had shorts on in the summer. So I must have been talking to ministers or something, same reason I put a suit and tie on. In my spare bedroom at home, which is the home office, and my son walks in, he says, "Oh, COVID business dress then."
COVID party business dress, always. Well, thank you very much. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we finish today?
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who came. Really do appreciate that, and the team who've put this on. But all of the number of people in the room is a tiny fraction of the people who are going to see this because it's out on the internet, and we send it around to people. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you to the interpreters.
Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to the interpreters as well today. You've been really excellent. Thank you so much.